Hi, Assalamualaikum and greetings to everyone. This is Bio 330, Chapter 3, Community Ecology, Part 3. In this third video lecture, I will explain about the community structure and ecological succession. Alright, let's begin with the community structure. Community structure is defined by the activities and the abundance of its diverse organisms. There are three features of community structure that result from the particular species compositions of a community and also the biological interactions among the populations within the community. The three features are, the first one, the feeding relationships within the communities, or also known as trophic structure. The second feature is species diversities, which includes the species richness and relative abundance. And last but not least, the features of disturbances and community stability. All these three features will be further explained in this video. Let's take a look on the first features. Feeding relationship or trophic structure is the most basic observation of a community structure. It can be determined by predator-prey, host parasites, and plant herbivory interactions. In addition, the study of trophic structure also identified the interaction that might represent the competition for foods. But this topic will be discussed thoroughly in the next chapter 4, Ecosystem Ecology. The second feature that construct the community structure is the species diversity. Species diversity can be defined by the species richness and their relative abundance in a particular area. Okay, let's go deep on what is the meaning of species richness and abundance. Species richness is the number of different species living in a particular area, which means the more species means greater richness. Next is the abundancy, which you need to take note about the species abundance and also relative abundance. Species abundance is the number of individuals per species. Meanwhile, the relative abundance is the number of individuals in a species relative to the total number of individuals in all species within a particular area. And the last one, species evenness, is the relative abundance of different species in a particular area. For example, if the community have a similar population abundance, means the community have more species evenness. So let's take a look on example to make a better understanding. Here, there are two different communities, Community 1 and Community 2, where both of them are composed of the same 4 species. These communities are identical to their species richness, which have 4 different species of trees, species trees A, B, C, and D. However, Community 1 and Community 2 is differ based on their relative species abundance. As you can see here, Community 1, each of the 4 species contribute to 25% of the populations. Therefore, the relative abundance of each species is more evenly distributed. Meanwhile, the Community 2, as you can see here, mostly are composed of species A with 80%. Species A is high relative species abundance compared to species B, C, and D. As a conclusion, while both communities have the same species richness, but somehow the Community 1 would have a greater diversity due to the relative abundance of each species present. Okay, we're still under species diversity, but here I would like to explain more on the different classification of species such as dominant species, invasive species, the ketone species, and the foundation species, which also have impacts on the community structure. The first one is the dominant species. Dominant species is either a plant, animal, or other living organism with the most abundant species within a community. They are most popular species or comprise the greatest biomass in the ecosystem. They exert a strong influence over the occurrence and distributions of the other species. Most dominant species are better at obtaining resources, they can resist diseases, and also deterring competitors or predators compared to other species. For example, the kangaroo rat in North American desert. This species feeds on the grass seeds, which enable them to survive without drinking water, and yet they do not sweat. Therefore, these adaptations allow them to survive and become a dominant species. The second classification species is the invasive species, which are either a plant, animal, or other living organisms that is not indigenous to a particular area, which means they are not originality from that area. And these invasive species either resulting a great economics or environmental harm to their new area. They usually can adapt with a new area easily. They can reproduce quickly. They may not have any natural predators, and they also can resist diseases. They are known as invasive species because they were accidentally introduced into a new area. They can compete with the native organisms for a limited resources. They will alter the habitat, and they even capable of causing extinctions of the native organisms. For instance, the golden apple snail, a freshwater gastropod which can help to improve the soil quality for agriculture. Nevertheless, it also can be a pest and cause a lot of damage to the certain crops and threaten to some native aquatic plants. The next species is the ketone species, which is the most important species in ecosystems. Ketone species are strongly interacting species that have large impact on the compositions of communities in their ecosystems. Usually, they are the least in count, which is less in number, but they are also either dominant or apex predators who present to keep the ecosystems in balance. For instance, the starfish is the ketone species in the marine life. They feed on mussels that grows on the rocky terrain inside the water. This means the starfish aids to control the populations of mussels, thus indirectly promotes the growth of the other species on the rocky surface. Other example, the grey wolf is also a ketone species in the temperate zones. It feeds on a variety of herbivores, thus reduce the competitions for grazing land among herbivores and also regulating the amount of grass in the ecosystem. Last one is the foundation species, which also play an important role in the ecosystem. These species can physically create and define the ecosystem, supporting more diverse and abundant communities. For example, the coral and also the beaver. Coral can provide or produce reef structure in a marine ecosystem, which provide a huge range of species with habitats, protections against predators, and also for breeding grounds. Ecologists also classified beavers as a ketone species because they can harvest trees, thus removing the undergrowth and maintaining an open forest understory. These harvested trees are used to build dams, which retain the stream water to form a pond, consequently provide the habitat for aquatic environment or organisms. Alright, the last features will be discussed here, which is that affect the community structure, is the disturbances and community stability. Disturbances may happen either naturally or by human cause, and it is a common in ecological communities. But how the community responses to the disturbances are varies. There are two things that relates to the ecological disturbance, which is the community stability and the community resilience. Community stability is the tendency of a community to reach and maintain an equilibrium or relatively to a constant condition in the face of disturbance. This stability depends on the types of community and also the nature of the disturbance. For example, one forest may have returned to their original compositions after a large-scale disturbances such as fire, but the same forest may not stable after a widespread of logging. The community resilience is the ability of a community to persist or continue to exist in the face of disturbance. This also related to community stability but not an individual population stability. By looking at population level, it may show a wide fluctuation in response to environmental change. But from a view of community level, it could persist in its major structure features and therefore be considered as resilient. Here are the pictures showing the disturbances caused by the nature and also caused by the human. Natural disturbance includes the fire, flood, hurricanes and drought, while the human-caused disturbance, for example, like deforestation or logging, farming or plantation, mining and grazing, and also some other activities. Okay, now our last topic for this chapter, which is the ecological succession. The word succession here means the sequence of changes in a community after a disturbance. Ecological succession is the transition in a species compositions over ecological time. In other words, this process describes how the structure of a biological community changes over time. The disturbed area may be colonized by a variety of species, which are gradually replaced by other species. There are two types of ecological succession, which is the primary succession and secondary succession. Primary successions occur on a bare, lifeless substrate where the soil has not yet formed. Contrarily, the secondary successions occur in the area where an existing community has been disturbed but the soil still remains. Let's further with the primary succession. Primary successions occur when the lands become barren due to a major geological event, or when a significant natural disaster wipes out all the ecosystem organisms. For example, like the volcanic island, the land that exposed, or the lakes that left behind after the retreating glacier. Primary successions have three main phases that occur over hundreds or even thousands of years. The first phase, called as the pioneer species, where it starts with the lichens and mosses, these species capable of decomposing the rock into the topsoil. The second phase is the intermediate species. This may take up after the topsoil has been formed. Grasses start to grow slowly over time, followed by shrubs. This competition for resources starts to begin, and the survival of the fittest will move to the next stage. The third phase is the climax species or the climax community. Over time, the previous phase organisms die off due to competitions. At this phase, larger trees grow to the fullest, while the shrub in a shadow may die off due to lack of sunlight because unable to perform the photosynthesis. So, this is how the primary succession occurs. In the first phase, the pioneer species start with a barren land with a bare rock, followed by the growth of mosses and lichens. Then, small annual plants, grasses, and perennials begins to grow. During intermediate species phase, grasses, shrubs, and other shade-intolerant trees such as pine will start to grow, and there is a great competition occurred in this phase. For the last phase, the climax community, shade-tolerant trees such as oak and hickory begin to grow and compete to gain sunlight and other resources. Again, this primary succession may take hundreds to thousands years to develop. Alright, let's take a look on the next types of ecological succession, which is the secondary succession. The secondary successions occur after events of disturbances that does not eliminate the soil. For instance, like the wildfire, landslide, or human activities such as farming. Secondary succession also happen in three main phases, but it occurs even more faster. It begins with the pioneer species, where the grasses and perennials are often the first species to recolonize the disturbed area. These species improve the soil by providing organic matter. The second phase is the intermediate species. During this phase, small bushes and trees begin to colonize the area and adding more organic matter to the soil. Then the succession ends with the climax species or the climax community phase. The fast-growing evergreen trees begin to develop to the fullest, while the shade-tolerant trees grow in the understory. How about the short-lived and the shade-intolerant trees? They may die off due to the same reason, unable to perform photosynthesis because lack of sunlight exposure. In this phase, the ecosystem will back to the stable state. So, this figure shows the transition process in secondary succession. It begins after the disturbance such as fire, which wipe out all the ecosystems. Then the pioneer species starts with the grasses and perennials populations. This may take about only 3 to 4 years to develop. Next, grasses, shrubs, pines, young oak, and hickory will start to grow during the intermediate species phase. At climax community, the area may consist of matured oak and hickory forests. The secondary succession may only take about 150 years to reach the stable states of ecosystem. Alright, to summarize, this table shows the differences between primary and secondary succession. As you can see here, the primary succession occurs on a bare or lifeless substrate, which is the soil is absent. The secondary succession occurs in the area where an existing community has been disturbed, which means the soil is still present. The pioneer species in primary successions are the lichens and mosses, while the secondary succession are the grasses and perennials. Species present in the primary succession usually from the external community, such as the invader or the migratory species. The species for the secondary succession are developed partly from the previous or the existing community. Primary successions have higher number of several communities compared to secondary succession. Primary succession take a long period of time for completions, may up to 1,000 years or more. Meanwhile, the secondary succession take less time for completion, around 50 to 200 years maximums. The examples of disturbances occur in the primary successions like rock left from a retreating glacier, landslide, or the volcanic island. In contrast, the examples of disturbances that lead to secondary succession are the burnt forest or the abandoned farm. Alright, that's the end of Chapter 3, Community Ecology. You may refer to biology book from Campbell or Raven for further reading. Thank you very much for listening. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.